In 2021, Formula 1 teams will be operating with a form of success handicapping, created by a sliding scale of aerodynamic testing limits based on last year's results. It means that this year Williams, the worst performing team of 2020, can do more work with CFD and in the wind tunnel. On the opposite end of the scale, Mercedes will have less resources available. This year the slope of this sliding scale is relatively gentle, but from 2022 it becomes much steeper, aiming to close the gap between the front and the back of the grid. Over the years, various ideas have been kicked around by the FIA and Formula 1 teams, such as success ballast and reverse grids. But it was generally agreed that most of the ideas were too artificial, and the focus switched from a direct impact on racers to the heart of what makes the top teams so successful, their research and development capabilities, or R&D. Formula 1's Director of Motorsport Ross Brawn says, "I'm pleased with it because I think it's a gentle correction. It still maintains the meritocracy, you still got to go out on track and win the race." So how will it work? First off, aerodynamic testing restrictions have been in the F1 sporting regulations for years. What can and can't be done is covered in great detail, and over time any loopholes, such as the information being shared across teams, has been addressed. The season is divided into 6 aerodynamic testing periods, ATPs, each including a limited amount of aero work, and teams have to report to the FIA exactly what they've done at the end of each period. Wind tunnel testing is subject to 3 key parameters. In 2020, these were 320 runs, 80 hours of wind on time, aka the time the wind is blown on a model, and 400 hours of occupancy, including the downtime between the actual wind tunnel runs. CFD usage is subject to a separate set of restrictions that require teams to submit full details of the systems and computing power at their disposal. Looking forward, the difference for 2021 is that limits are different for each team, based on the 2020 World Championship order, with 5th place being the base values taken from 2020. There is also a reset on June the 30th, the end of the 3rd ATP period, just after the French Grand Prix. At that stage, the order will be changed to reflect the current World Championship order. So how much impact will the new limits have? Will the 2.5% difference between Mercedes and Red Bull really create a significant advantage for the latter? In the first half of the season, it adds up to a difference of 6 wind-on hours, or 24 tunnel runs. And that's a useful gain for Red Bull Racing, but not one that will necessarily make a dramatic difference. Where it gets more interesting is when you look at the larger gaps between teams, most intriguingly how that concerns Ferrari coming 6th in 2020. For example, the difference between Ferrari and Mercedes is 120 runs and 30 wind-on hours. Not an insignificant amount, and if used effectively, it could be of immense value to the red team. So why are F1's new aero testing limits such a challenge? Now the key in 2021 is that R&D time has to be shared between developing the current car and preparing for the raft of changes coming to the 2022 car design. Every team will have to decide how to allocate its scarce resources across the 2 projects, and therefore every run in the tunnel is even more precious than the last few years. Mercedes Technical Director James Allison has said that while winning the 2020 championship was great, they will pay the price in 2021. But he's also stated that Mercedes is adopting a new positive approach. We've only got 1 run in the wind tunnel, let's make that run as valuable to us as possible. In essence, to balance the scales against the FIA's R&D time reduction, they need to make the time they do have more effective, hoping to negate any potential loss of performance. But this of course leads to a question: develop longer into 2021's car and hope to gain more points this year, or change over to 2022's development early in order to get a leg up? Now don't forget that while teams are using their 2020 cars as a starting point this year, aero development has remained free. If anything, thanks to the freeze on mechanical parts, aerodynamics is a key area where teams can gain the upper hand this year. There's also the package of new aero changes to contend with, which we've spoken about before in our 2021 rule changes video. Check out the link in the description below to find out more about those. These changes, intended to trim downforce and take load off Pirelli's tyres, add up to a significant change to the airflow, and lessons will be learned which need to be adapted to throughout the year. Teams either fighting for the title or a close-knit battle in the standings will be wary about stopping the current car's development too early, potentially losing out to rivals who held out longer. But on the other hand, switching early to 2022 development might equal a more advanced understanding of the future of F1, something not to be underestimated. Then of course there's the winnings versus future development ratio. A higher position this year will equal a larger pot of gold, obviously something rather useful. But it will also lead to a negative start for the following year, and teams will have to decide which they think is more valuable. All in all, you'd have to be incredibly brave not to develop your 2021 car at all. Haas. And at some point this year, every team will gradually develop their 2021 cars less and their 2022 cars more. As we mentioned earlier, the sliding ATR scale will become steeper from 2022 onwards. Most notably, the winning end of the scale will have an even larger drop-off of R&D time. For example, the gap between the 1st and 6th places doubles from 120 runs to 240 for the first 6 months of the year, which is a huge difference. It means that the team that wins the 2022 title will find it much harder than usual to maintain that momentum into 2023 and beyond, if others make good use of their extra resources. The most talented aerodynamicists with the most effective CFD programs and best calibrated tunnels will always have an advantage, quality over quantity in other words. However, the time difference between teams will become so significant that it's sure to have some impact. A team might dominate one season, lose out on aero R&D time, and underperform the next season, in turn leading to more R&D time, meaning a stronger following season, and you get the picture. But this is exactly what F1 and the FIA want, less predictability and more variation in the standings. Now, no doubt a debate over the system will ramp up as its impact becomes more apparent, but it'll definitely be interesting to see whether the handicap system shakes things up in the coming seasons.